Welcome to Tech with Kaushik. This is part 12 of our complete practice question series for the AZ-900 Microsoft Azure Fundamentals exam. Choose your answer before the timer ends. Then review the correct answer, detailed explanation, and exam tip. Let us begin part 12. Let's take a look at question number 431. This question checks your understanding of availability zones. First, let's review the situation. You are designing a high availability architecture for a web application hosted on Azure virtual machines. You must ensure the application remains available even if an entire Azure data center experiences a catastrophic power failure. Solution: you deploy the virtual machines into an Azure availability set. Does this meet the goal? Now let's review the options. Choice A, yes. Choice B, no. The best choice is option B, no. Let's look at the reasoning. An availability set distributes virtual machines across different fault domains, racks, within a single data center, protecting against localized hardware failures. It does not protect against a failure of the entire data center. To protect against a data center failure, you must use availability zones. The solution is incorrect because an availability set cannot survive the loss of the data center that hosts it. Keep this point in mind for the exam. Use availability sets for rack-level fault tolerance. Use availability zones for data center-level fault tolerance. Let's continue with question number 432. Take a moment to review this scenario. A finance team wants to analyze actual Azure spending over time and group costs by subscription, resource group, service, and resource. Which Azure capability should the team use? Here are the possible answers. Option A is Microsoft Cost Management. Option B is Azure Pricing Calculator. Option C is Azure Policy. Option D is Azure Service Health. The answer here is option A, Microsoft Cost Management. The main reason is Microsoft Cost Management provides cost analysis, reporting, budgets, alerts, and optimization capabilities for actual Azure consumption. The other choices do not work because B, the pricing calculator estimates planned costs before deployment. C, Azure Policy enforces resource governance standards. D, Service Health reports platform incidents and maintenance. Here's a useful exam tip. Cost management analyzes actual spending, the pricing calculator estimates planned spending. Now let's examine question number 433. We are moving on to defense in depth. Let's start with the scenario. An organization protects its workloads with physical security, identity controls, network filtering, application safeguards, and data protection so that another layer remains if one control fails. Which security strategy does this describe? Let's compare the available options. Option A is defense in depth. Option B is single sign-on. Option C is consumption-based pricing. Option D is elasticity. The right response is option A, defense in depth. Here's why. Defense in depth uses multiple security layers to reduce the chance that failure of one control will compromise the entire environment. The remaining options can be eliminated because B, SSO lets users access multiple applications after one signing. C, consumption-based pricing charges according to resource usage. D, elasticity automatically adjusts resources as demand changes. The main takeaway is defense in depth uses overlapping controls across physical, identity, perimeter, network, compute, application, and data layers. Let's work through question number 434. Here's the situation to consider. An administrator is reviewing Azure Advisor recommendations. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Now check Statement 1. Azure Advisor provides personalized recommendations related to cost, performance, reliability, security, and operational excellence. Now check Statement 2. Azure Advisor automatically changes Azure resources whenever it generates a recommendation. Now check Statement 3. Implementing applicable security recommendations displayed through Azure Advisor can improve Microsoft Defender for Cloud Secure score. The first statement is yes. These are the primary Azure Advisor recommendation categories. The second statement is no. Administrators review and choose whether to implement recommendations. The third statement is yes. Remediating recommendations that contribute to secure score can increase the score. A helpful shortcut is this. Advisor recommends it does not automatically reconfigure resources merely because a recommendation exists. Let's work through question number 435. This question takes us into cloud models. Take a moment to review this scenario. A startup company decides to build its entire IT infrastructure without purchasing physical servers or leasing real estate for a server room. An organization that hosts all of its infrastructure no longer requires a physical data center of its own. Take a look at each choice. Choice A, in a public cloud. Choice B, in a private cloud. Choice C, in a hybrid cloud. Choice D, on an on-premises Hyper-V host. In this case, choose option A, in a public cloud. In a public cloud model, the cloud provider, like Microsoft Azure, owns, manages, and maintains all the physical hardware and data center facilities. The organization consumes resources over the internet, completely eliminating the need for their own data center. Let's quickly check the incorrect choices. B. A private cloud is typically hosted in an organization's own physical data center. C. A hybrid cloud involves maintaining some on-premises data center footprint alongside public cloud resources. D. An on-premises Hyper-V host requires the organization to provide the physical space, power, and cooling. Exam tip. The public cloud model is the only deployment model that entirely eliminates the need for customer-owned physical data center infrastructure. Let's continue with question number 436. Let's start with the scenario. A finance director wants to understand how the monthly Azure bill is calculated. You need to explain the primary factors that influence the cost of Azure resources. Which three factors have a direct impact on the cost of an Azure resource? Each correct answer presents a complete solution. Choose the best three responses. Now let's review the options. Choice A, the Azure region where the resource is deployed. Choice B, the volume of outbound data transfer, egress. Choice C, the service tier or SKU selected. Choice D, the volume of inbound data transfer, ingress. Choice E, the specific content of the data being processed. The required selections are option A. The Azure region where the resource is deployed, option B. The volume of outbound data transfer, egress, and option C. The service tier or SKU selected. This is the best choice because resource costs vary by region due to different local operational costs. Outbound data transfer, egress, is generally billed per gigabytes. The chosen service tier, for example, standard versus premium, or VM size, dictates the base compute or storage cost. Here's why the alternatives are not suitable. D. Inbound data transfer, ingress, into Azure data centers is generally free. E. Azure bills based on compute time, storage volume, and bandwidth, regardless of whether the data content is financial records or cat videos. Three major factors affecting Azure costs are resource type tier, location, region, and bandwidth, outbound egress. Inbound bandwidth is free. Let's take a look at question number 437. The focus now shifts to storage access tiers. First, let's review the situation. A data engineer is designing an archival strategy using Azure Blob Storage and evaluating the different access tiers. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. The first statement says, the archive access tier can be set as the default tier at the storage account level. The second statement says, the cool access tier offers lower storage costs than the hot access tier, but higher data access costs. The third statement says, you can change the access tier of an individual blob after it has been uploaded to Azure storage. For statement 1, choose no. Archive must be assigned to individual blobs or through lifecycle management, it is not an account default tier. For statement 2, choose yes. Cool is intended for infrequently accessed data and trades lower storage cost for higher access charges. For statement 3, choose yes. A blob can be moved among supported access tiers manually or through lifecycle management. Keep this point in mind for the exam. Hot, cool, and cold are online tiers, archive is offline, and is assigned at the blob level. Let's focus on question number 438. The key situation is this. An Azure virtual machine must access an Azure storage account through a private IP address in its virtual network. The storage traffic must not be exposed to the public internet. Which feature should be used? Focus on what separates these choices. Now examine choice A. A private endpoint. Now examine choice B. A public endpoint. Now examine choice C. Virtual network peering. Now examine choice D. An Azure DNS zone. Go with option A. A private endpoint. This works because a private endpoint assigns a private IP address from the virtual network to access the Azure service through Azure private link over the Microsoft backbone. Now let's rule out the other options. B. A public endpoint is internet routable. C. Peering connects virtual networks but does not create a private endpoint for the storage account. D. DNS resolves names but does not itself provide private connectivity. Here's a useful exam tip. A private endpoint brings an Azure service into a virtual network through a private IP address. Now let's examine question number 439. Next, let's move into resource tags. Here's the situation to consider. A company has a single Azure subscription used by the marketing, HR, and IT departments. The finance team needs to generate a monthly report showing exactly how much each department is spending on Azure resources. Which Azure feature should you use to logically categorize resources by department for billing purposes? Take a look at each choice. Option A is Azure Tags. Option B is Azure Policy. Option C is Management Groups. Option D is Resource Logs. The best choice is option A, Azure tags. Let's look at the reasoning. Tags are name value pairs, for example, department marketing that you apply to Azure resources. They are specifically used to logically organize resources and are heavily utilized in Microsoft Cost Management to group billing data by department, project, or environment. B. Azure policy enforces rules. Although it can be used to require tags, the tags themselves provide the categorization. C. Management groups organize subscriptions, not individual resources within a single subscription. D. Resource locks prevent deletion or modification. The main takeaway is whenever you need to categorize resources for cost allocation or billing reports within a subscription, use tags. Let's work through question number 440. Let's start with the scenario. You are responsible for managing Azure spending. You want to set a spending limit of $1,000 per month for a specific resource group and receive an email alert when spending reaches 80% of that limit. Which Azure cost management feature should you configure? Let's compare the available options. Choice A, budgets. Choice B, Azure tags. Choice C, Azure advisor. Choice D, resource quotas. The answer here is option A, budgets. The main reason is cost management budgets allow you to set financial limits for a given scope, like a subscription or resource group, and configure proactive alerts that trigger when spending reaches defined thresholds, for example, 80% of the budget. The other choices do not work because B. Tags organize resources but do not monitor spending or trigger alerts. C. Advisor provides recommendations to save money but does not enforce financial limits or send threshold alerts. D. Resource quotas limit the number of technical resources you can deploy, for example, 20 vCPUs, not the financial cost. A helpful shortcut is this. Use Azure cost management budgets to set spending thresholds and receive alerts when costs approach those limits. Here comes question number 441. Consider this situation. Your organization hires a new employee. You need to create a user identity that can later be assigned permissions to Azure resources. Which Microsoft service should you use to create and manage the user identity? Review the options. Choice A, Microsoft Entra ID. Choice B, Azure subscriptions. Choice C, Azure resource groups. Choice D, Microsoft cost management. Go with option A, Microsoft Entra ID. Here's why. Microsoft Entra ID is Microsoft's cloud-based identity and access management service. It stores and manages users, groups, and other identities. The remaining options can be eliminated because B. Subscriptions are billing and access management boundaries. C. Resource groups are logical containers for Azure resources. D. Microsoft cost management analyzes, monitors, and helps optimize cloud costs. Exam tip. Microsoft Entra ID manages identities. Azure RBAC determines what those identities can do with Azure resources. Next up is question number 442. A security administrator is evaluating how Azure manages authentication and authorization for cloud resources. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Statement 1, Azure Role-Based Access Control, RBAC, permissions can only be assigned to cloud-native user accounts created directly in Microsoft Entra ID. Statement 2, identities synchronized from an on-premises Active Directory to Microsoft Entra ID can be used to authenticate and access Azure resources. Statement 3. Microsoft Entra ID provides built-in authentication services that secure access to Azure resources. Statement 1 should be marked No. RBAC roles can be assigned to synchronized on-premises users, external B2B guest users, and service principals managed identities. Statement 2 should be marked Yes. This is the primary purpose of Microsoft Entra Connect, allowing on-premises users to access cloud resources using hybrid identities. Statement 3 should be marked Yes. Microsoft Entra ID is the default, built-in identity and access management service for Azure. Microsoft Entra ID supports assigning Azure RBAC roles to cloud-native users, synchronized on-premises users, guest users, and applications. Let's continue with question number 443. Take a moment to review this scenario. An application architect is choosing the correct Azure storage services for different components of a new software project. Match the Azure storage service to its appropriate use case. The left column contains Item 1 on the left is Azure Blob Storage. Item 2 on the left is Azure Files. Item 3 on the left is Azure Queue Storage. The right column contains right side choice A provides fully managed file shares that can be mounted concurrently by Windows, macOS, and Linux via the SMB protocol. Right side choice B provides object storage for large amounts of unstructured data and supports the archive access tier. Right side choice C provides a store for asynchronous message delivery between decoupled application components. Here are the correct matches. The correct match for Azure Blob Storage is B, provides object storage for large amounts of unstructured data and supports the archive access tier. The correct match for Azure Files is A, provides fully managed file shares that can be mounted concurrently by Windows, macOS, and Linux via the SMB protocol. The correct match for Azure Queue Storage is C, provides a store for asynchronous message delivery between decoupled application components. Azure Files provides standard network shares. Azure Blob Storage is object storage that supports lifecycle management and access tiers, hot, cool, archive. Queue storage is used for application messaging. Keep this point in mind for the exam. Use Azure Files for SMB network shares. Use Azure Queue Storage for decoupling applications with messages. Use Azure Blob for unstructured object storage and cold archiving. See how you handle question number 444. Before choosing, identify the key constraint. A company wants Azure storage data to remain available if one availability zone in the primary region fails. Replication to a secondary region is not required. Which redundancy option should the company select? Use the details in the question to eliminate options. Consider option A, locally redundant storage, LRS. Consider option B, zone redundant storage, ZRS. Consider option C, geo-redundant storage, GRS. Consider option D, read access geo-redundant storage, RAGRS. The right response is option B, zone redundant storage, ZRS. This is the best choice because ZRS synchronously replicates data across availability zones in the primary region, protecting against the failure of a single zone without requiring a secondary region. Let's quickly check the incorrect choices. A. LRS keeps copies within one data center and does not provide zone-level protection. C. GRS adds asynchronous replication to a secondary region. D. RAGRS adds secondary region replication and read access to the secondary endpoint. Here's a useful exam tip. LRS protects against local hardware failures. ZRS protects against a zone failure. GRS adds a secondary region. Let's take a look at question number 445. This question takes us into IaaS PaaS SaaS. Here's the situation to consider. A small business wants to adopt cloud services but has no dedicated IT staff. They want a cloud model where the provider is responsible for managing the infrastructure, the operating system, the runtime, and the application software itself. Which cloud service model minimizes the management responsibility of the customer? Here are the possible answers. Option A is Software as a Service, SaaS. Option B is Platform as a Service, PaaS. Option C is Infrastructure as a Service, IaaS. Option D is Serverless Computing. In this case, choose option A, Software as a Service, SaaS. This works because in a Software as a Service, SaaS, model, the cloud provider hosts and manages the entire application stack, from the physical hardware up to the application software. The customer is only responsible for managing their data and user access, minimizing their IT management burden. Here's why the alternatives are not suitable. B. In PaaS, the customer must manage the application code and data. C. In IaaS, the customer must manage the operating system, runtime, middleware, and application. D. Serverless reduces infrastructure management, but the customer still writes and manages the application code. The main takeaway is SaaS requires the least amount of management from the customer. IaaS requires the most. Now let's examine question number 446. First, let's review the situation. You are adopting infrastructure as code to automate your Azure deployments. You decide to use native Azure Resource Manager, ARM, templates to define your infrastructure. In which data format are Azure Resource Manager, ARM, templates written? Now let's review the options. Option A is JSON. Option B is XML. Option C is HTML. Option D is CSV. The right response is option A, JSON. Let's look at the reasoning. Azure Resource Manager, ARM, templates are declarative files written in JavaScript object notation, JSON, format. They define the resources and configurations to be deployed to Azure. Now let's rule out the other options. B. XML is an older markup language not used for ARM templates. C. HTML is used for web pages, not infrastructure definitions. D. CSV is used for tabular data, not complex nested resource definitions. A helpful shortcut is this. ARM templates are always written in JSON format. Note, Bicep is an alternative domain-specific language that compiles down into JSON ARM templates. Let's work through question number 447. The focus now shifts to Azure policy. Take a moment to review this scenario. An organization requires all new Azure resources to be deployed only in approved regions and wants a compliance report for existing resources. Which Azure service should the organization use? Here are the possible answers. Choice A, Azure Policy. Choice B, Resource Locks. Choice C, Azure Tags. Choice D, Azure Advisor. The best choice is option A, Azure Policy. The main reason is Azure policy evaluates resources against defined rules, enforces organizational standards, and reports compliance at scale. B. Resource locks protect resources from accidental deletion or modification. C. Tags add metadata for organization and cost reporting. D. Azure Advisor provides optimization recommendations rather than enforcing deployment standards. Exam tip. Use Azure policy for standards and compliance. Use resource locks to prevent deletion or modification. Question number 448. Scenario. You want to collect performance telemetry and event logs from 5 Azure virtual machines. Once collected, you need a powerful query engine to analyze, cross-reference, and compare the log data across all 5 machines simultaneously. Which 2 Azure tools are required to collect and query this data? Each correct answer presents part of the solution. Select 2 answers that satisfy the requirement. Option A, Azure Monitor. Option B, Log Analytics. Option C, Azure Service Health. Option D, Azure Advisor. Option E, Azure Event Grid. The correct answers are Option A, Azure Monitor, and Option B, Log Analytics. Here's why. Azure Monitor is the overarching service that collects telemetry and logs from Azure resources. Log Analytics, a feature within Azure Monitor, provides a workspace to store the data and a powerful query language, KQL, to analyze and compare event details across multiple resources. The other choices do not work because C. Service Health reports on platform-level outages, not guest OS event logs from virtual machines. D. Advisor provides best practice recommendations, not a query engine for raw logs. E. Event Grid routes specific state change events, like a blob being created, rather than aggregating and querying performance telemetry and system logs. Use Azure Monitor to collect telemetry data, and use Log Analytics workspaces and KQL to query, analyze, and compare that data. Question number 449. We are moving on to cloud benefits. Here's the scenario. A company wants its application to remain accessible with minimal downtime when an individual component fails. Which cloud benefit addresses this requirement? Option A, high availability. Option B, scalability. Option C, governance. Option D, consumption-based pricing. The answer here is option A, high availability. High availability is the ability of a service or application to remain accessible despite failures, helping minimize downtime. The remaining options can be eliminated because B. Scalability adjusts capacity to meet demand. C. Governance helps enforce standards and compliance. D. Consumption-based pricing charges according to usage. Keep this point in mind for the exam. High availability reduces downtime, scalability changes capacity, elasticity automatically adjusts capacity as demand changes. Next, question number 450. An e-commerce application automatically adds web servers during flash sales and removes them when traffic decreases. Which cloud computing benefit does this behavior demonstrate? Options. Option A, elasticity. Option B, predictability. Option C, high availability. Option D, governance. Go with option A, elasticity. This is the best choice because elasticity is the ability to automatically add or remove resources in response to changing demand. Let's quickly check the incorrect choices. B. Predictability concerns forecasting performance and costs. C. High availability focuses on minimizing downtime during failures. D. Governance applies standards, policies, and controls. Here's a useful exam tip. Elasticity automatically scales resources out and in as demand changes. Let's continue with question number 451. Next, let's move into serverless computing. Here's the situation to consider. A developer needs to run code whenever a new message arrives in an Azure queue. The developer does not want to provision or manage servers. Which Azure compute service should the developer use? Take a look at each choice. Option A is Azure Functions. Option B is Azure Application Gateway. Option C is Azure Virtual Machines. Option D is Azure Resource Manager. In this case, choose option A, Azure Functions. This works because Azure Functions is a serverless compute service that runs event-driven code without requiring the developer to provision or manage servers. Here's why the alternatives are not suitable. B. Application Gateway manages web traffic. C. Virtual machines require management of the guest operating system. D. Azure Resource Manager is the Azure deployment and management service. The main takeaway is use Azure Functions for event-driven code when you do not want to manage the underlying servers. Now let's examine question number 452. Let's start with the scenario. A team is comparing the primary Azure storage services. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Now check statement 1. Azure Blob Storage is designed for unstructured object data such as images and videos. Now check statement 2. Azure Files provides managed file shares that can use SMB or NFS. Now check statement 3. Azure Queue Storage is a relational database service for structured business records. The answer here is yes. Blob storage is Azure object storage for unstructured data. The answer here is yes. Azure Files provides managed cloud file shares. The answer here is no. Queue storage stores messages for asynchronous processing. A helpful shortcut is this. Blobs store objects, files provides shares, queues stores messages, and tables stores no SQL key value data. Here's an important one, question number 453. Next, let's move into infrastructure as code. Let's focus on the following scenario. Your organization is adopting infrastructure as code to deploy Azure resources consistently. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Statement 1. Azure Resource Manager templates allow you to define and deploy infrastructure using code. Statement 2. An Azure Resource Manager template can be deployed through the Azure portal. Statement 3. A separate Azure Resource Manager template is required for every individual resource. Statement 1 should be marked yes. ARM templates declaratively define Azure resources. Statement 2 should be marked yes. The portal supports custom template deployments. Statement 3 should be marked no. One template can deploy multiple related resources. Exam tip. ARM templates use declarative infrastructure as code for repeatable, consistent deployments. Let's take a look at question number 454. First, let's review the situation. A network engineer is comparing Azure connectivity services. Match each Azure networking service to its primary purpose. Here are the items on the left. Left side choice 1, Azure Express Route. Left side choice 2, Virtual Network Peering. Left side choice 3, Azure VPN Gateway. Choose from these right side options. Choice A on the right is extends an on-premises network to Microsoft Cloud Services through a private connection. Choice B on the right is connects Azure virtual networks through the Microsoft backbone. Choice C on the right is creates an encrypted connection between an on-premises network and Azure over the public internet. Use these pairings. Pair Azure Express Route and A extends an on-premises network to Microsoft Cloud Services through a private connection. Pair Virtual Network Peering and B connects Azure Virtual Networks through the Microsoft backbone. Pair Azure VPN Gateway and C creates an encrypted connection between an on-premises network and Azure over the public internet. Let's look at the reasoning. The services address different connectivity needs: private dedicated connectivity, Azure Virtual Network connectivity, and encrypted VPN connectivity over the public internet. ExpressRoute is private, VPN Gateway uses encrypted internet connectivity, and peering connects Azure Virtual Networks. Question number 455 brings in a useful concept. This question takes us into storage services. This situation sets up the main requirement. Your organization has legacy applications that require a centralized, serverless server message block, SMB, file share that can be mounted simultaneously from multiple Azure virtual machines. Which Azure service must you create first in order to host this new Azure file share? Watch the differences between these options. Option A, Storage Accounts. Option B, Virtual Networks. Option C, App Services. Option D, Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Go with option A, Storage Accounts. The main reason is Azure file shares are created and hosted within an Azure storage account. You must first deploy a storage account, and then you can create one or multiple file shares, as well as blob containers, tables, or queues inside it. Now let's rule out the other options. B. Virtual networks provide network connectivity, not storage capacity. C. App services host web applications. D. Defender for cloud is for security posture management. Keep this point in mind for the exam. To create an Azure file share, Azure blob container, table, or queue, you must first create an Azure storage account to host them. Now for question number 456. Here's what is happening. An administrator needs to manage Azure resources from a web browser and cannot install tools on the local device. Which two Azure management tools meet the requirement? Each correct answer presents a complete solution. Select exactly two answers. The choices are: Choice A, Azure Portal. Choice B, Azure Cloud Shell. Choice C, Azure Storage Explorer. Choice D, locally installed Azure CLI. Choice E, Azure Advisor. You should choose option A, Azure Portal, and option B, Azure Cloud Shell. Here's why. The Azure Portal is a browser-based graphical management interface. Azure Cloud Shell provides browser-based Azure CLI and Azure PowerShell environments. C. Azure Storage Explorer is a separately installed application focused on storage data. D. A locally installed Azure CLI does not meet the no installation requirement. E. Azure Advisor provides recommendations rather than a general resource management interface. Here's a useful exam tip. The Azure Portal provides browser-based graphical management. Cloud Shell provides browser-based command line management. Now for question number 457. We are moving on to consumption pricing. Here's the scenario. A company migrates from purchased on-premises servers to an Azure pay-as-you-go subscription. Which expenditure model generally applies to the Azure pay-as-you-go solution? Here are the options. Option A, Operational Expenditure, OPEX. Option B, Capital Expenditure, CAPEX. Option C, Fixed Cost Expenditure. Option D, Scalable Expenditure. The right response is option A, Operational Expenditure, OPEX. Pay-as-you-go cloud services are generally treated as operating expenses because charges recur according to consumption instead of requiring an upfront hardware purchase. The other choices do not work because B, CAPEX normally involves upfront investment in physical assets. C, consumption costs vary with usage rather than remaining fixed. D, scalable expenditure is not a standard accounting category. The main takeaway is on-premises hardware commonly involves CAPEX, cloud consumption commonly shifts spending toward OPEX. Question number 458. Needs a little extra thought. Pay close attention to what the scenario really requires. An Azure subscription contains several unused virtual machines and managed disks. The resources are no longer required, and their data has been backed up. Solution: you delete the unused virtual machines and their associated managed disks. Does this meet the goal of reducing ongoing Azure costs? See which choices you can rule out. Next, option A, yes. Next, option B, no. The best choice is option A, yes. This is the best choice because Azure Compute and Managed Storage are built resources. Deleting unused virtual machines and their associated managed disks removes those ongoing resource charges. The remaining options can be eliminated because B, the solution does reduce costs because both unused compute and associated managed storage are removed. A helpful shortcut is this. Unused Azure resources can continue generating charges, identify and remove resources that are no longer required. Let's take a look at question number 459. We are working with Azure Cost Management here. Take a moment to review this scenario. A company is forecasting the cost of an Azure storage solution. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. The first statement says, storing the same amount of data in Azure always costs exactly the same in every Azure region. The second statement says, Azure storage charges can include both stored capacity and data operations. The third statement says, transferring data between Azure regions can affect the total Azure cost. For statement 1, choose no. Azure prices can vary by region. For statement 2, choose yes. Capacity and transaction-related operations can both affect cost. For statement 3, choose yes. Inter-region data transfer can generate additional charges. Exam tip. Azure costs can depend on service type, region, usage, operations, redundancy, and data transfer. Take a careful look at question number 460. Look for the most important clue in this scenario. 5 business units each require the same collection of virtual networks, virtual machines, and storage accounts. Which Azure capability should be used to deploy these environments consistently and repeatedly? Compare each option with the requirement. Consider option A, Azure Resource Manager templates. Consider option B, virtual machine scale sets. Consider option C, Azure management groups. consider option D, Azure API management. The answer here is option A, Azure Resource Manager Templates. This works because ARM templates declaratively define multiple Azure resources and support repeatable, consistent infrastructure as code deployments. Let's quickly check the incorrect choices. B. Virtual machine scale sets create and manage groups of similar virtual machines. C. Management groups organize subscriptions for governance. D. API management publishes, secures, and manages APIs. Use ARM templates for repeatable deployments of complete Azure environments containing multiple resource types. Let's focus on question number 461. This is marked as a medium question. Let's focus on the following scenario. A company wants Azure virtual machines to remain available if a data center within an Azure region fails. Complete each statement by selecting the correct option. The first one reads, the virtual machines should be distributed across the blank. Your choices are 1. Availability zones, resource groups, or management groups. The second one reads, availability zones are the blank. Your choices are 2. Physically separate groups of data centers within an Azure region, logical containers for Azure resources, or billing boundaries for Azure usage. For statement 1, choose availability zones. Availability zones provide data center level fault isolation within a region. For statement 2, choose physically separate groups of data centers within an Azure region. Each zone has independent power, cooling, and networking. Keep this point in mind for the exam. Availability zones protect against data center level failures within an Azure region. Let's continue with question number 462. Here's the situation to consider. A finance team needs to analyze Azure spending, create budgets, and receive notifications when spending approaches a defined threshold. Which Azure service should the team use? Let's compare the available options. Choice A, Microsoft Cost Management. Choice B, Azure Pricing Calculator. Choice C, Azure Service Health. Choice D, Microsoft Defender for Cloud. In this case, choose option A, Microsoft Cost Management. Let's look at the reasoning. Microsoft Cost Management helps organizations analyze, monitor, budget, and optimize Azure and other Microsoft Cloud costs. Here's why the alternatives are not suitable. B. The pricing calculator estimates expected costs before deployment. C. Service Health reports service incidents, maintenance, and advisories. D. Defender for Cloud assesses security posture and protects workloads. Here's a useful exam tip. Use the pricing calculator to estimate costs and Microsoft Cost Management to analyze and control actual spending. Let's work through question number 463. The focus now shifts to availability zones. Let's start with the scenario. A web application runs on Azure virtual machines and must remain available if an entire data center fails. Solution: you deploy the virtual machines into 2 different resource groups. Does this meet the goal? Now let's review the options. Choice A, yes. Choice B, no. The right response is option B, no. The main reason is resource groups are logical management containers and do not provide physical fault isolation. Availability zones are used to distribute workloads across separate data center groups within a region. Now let's rule out the other options. A. Separate resource groups do not protect workloads from a data center failure. The main takeaway is resource groups organize resources. Availability zones provide data center level fault isolation. Now let's examine question number 464. First, let's review the situation. A developer runs event-driven code in the cloud and does not provision or manage the underlying servers. Which cloud computing concept does this describe? Let's compare the available options. Option A is serverless computing. Option B is infrastructure as a service. Option C is software as a service. Option D is private cloud. Go with option A, serverless computing. Here's why. Serverless computing lets developers run code without provisioning or managing servers. The cloud provider manages the infrastructure and can scale execution in response to events. B. IaaS provides infrastructure such as virtual machines that customers manage. C. SaaS provides a complete application to end users. D. Private cloud is a deployment model dedicated to one organization. A helpful shortcut is this. Serverless computing abstracts server management and is commonly used for event-driven workloads. Let's continue with question number 465. Next, let's move into Azure storage. First, let's review the situation. An organization needs one service for unstructured object data such as images and videos, and another service for managed file shares that applications can access by using SMB. Which two Azure storage services meet the requirements? Each correct answer presents part of the solution. You need to identify two correct options. Take a look at each choice. Option A is Azure Blob Storage. Option B is Azure Files. Option C is Azure Queue Storage. Option D is Azure Table Storage. Option E is Azure Managed Disks. The answers that work here are option A, Azure Blob Storage, and option B, Azure Files. Blob storage stores unstructured objects. Azure Files provides managed cloud file shares that support protocols such as SMB. The other choices do not work because C, Queue Storage stores messages for asynchronous processing. D, Table Storage stores structured NoSQL key value data. E, Managed disks provide block storage for Azure virtual machines. Exam tip. Use blob storage for objects and Azure Files for managed shared file access. Here comes question number 466. Here's what is happening. An IT operations team is designing a centralized monitoring strategy. They need to collect detailed application performance telemetry and execute complex queries against centralized system logs. Which two tools or features are core components integrated directly within Azure Monitor to achieve these goals? Each correct answer presents part of the solution. You need to identify two correct options. Review the options. Choice A, Log Analytics. Choice B, Application Insights. Choice C, Azure Advisor. Choice D, Azure Service Health. Choice E, Microsoft Purview. The answers that work here are option A, Log Analytics, and option B, Application Insights. This is the best choice because Application Insights is an extensible application performance management (APM) feature of Azure Monitor used for application telemetry. Log Analytics is the tool within Azure Monitor used to write and execute queries against aggregated log data. The remaining options can be eliminated because C, Azure Advisor provides optimization recommendations, cost, security, but is not a telemetry collection or log querying feature of Azure Monitor. D. Azure Service Health provides alerts about Azure platform incidents and maintenance, not application telemetry. E. Purview is used for data governance and classification. Application Insights, APM, and Log Analytics, log querying, are the two primary foundational features of Azure Monitor. Let's take a look at question number 467. This question takes us into IaaS concepts. Take a moment to review this scenario. A company is deploying virtual machines using the Infrastructure as a Service (IaaS) cloud model in Azure. They are mapping out the shared responsibility model to understand their security obligations. In the IaaS model, which two components are the sole responsibility of the cloud service provider, Microsoft? Each correct answer presents a complete solution. Choose the best two responses. Here are the possible answers. Choice A, the physical security of the data center infrastructure. Choice B, maintaining the physical server hardware. Choice C, the installation and patching of the guest operating system. Choice D, the configuration of virtual network security rules, NSGS. Choice E, managing the application code deployed on the virtual machine. The required selections are option A, the physical security of the data center infrastructure, and option B, maintaining the physical server hardware. This works because in an IaaS model, the cloud provider assumes responsibility for the underlying physical infrastructure. This includes physical data center security, power, cooling, and maintaining the physical server compute, storage, and networking hardware. Let's quickly check the incorrect choices. C. In IaaS, the customer is responsible for installing, patching, and maintaining the guest operating system. D. The customer configures their own virtual network security, like NSGS. E. The customer is always responsible for their own application code and data. Keep this point in mind for the exam. In IaaS, Microsoft manages the physical hardware and data center. You manage everything inside the VM, starting from the operating system upward. Now let's examine question number 468. Here's the situation to consider. An organization is evaluating Microsoft Defender for Cloud. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. The first statement says, Microsoft Defender for Cloud provides a secure score that reflects security posture. The second statement says, Microsoft Defender for Cloud provides security recommendations for cloud resources. The third statement says, Microsoft Defender for Cloud is the primary service used to create Microsoft Entra user accounts. The first statement is yes. Secure score summarizes the assessed security posture. The second statement is yes. Recommendations identify actions that can improve security posture. The third statement is no. Microsoft Entra ID is used to create and manage user identities. Here's a useful exam tip. Defender for Cloud assesses and improves security posture. Microsoft Entra ID manages identities. Let's work through question number 469. The difficulty level here is medium. Let's start with the scenario. A team packages an application and its dependencies into lightweight, isolated units that share the host operating system and usually start faster than virtual machines. Which compute option does this describe? Here are the possible answers. Choice A, containers. Choice B, virtual machines. Choice C, Azure Functions. Choice D, Azure Virtual Desktop. In this case, choose option A, Containers. Let's look at the reasoning. Containers package an application and its dependencies while sharing the host operating system. They are typically lighter and start faster than virtual machines. Here's why the alternatives are not suitable. B. Virtual machines include a complete guest operating system. C. Azure Functions runs event-driven serverless code. D. Azure Virtual Desktop provides hosted Windows desktops and applications. The main takeaway is containers share the host OS, virtual machines include a guest OS, functions provide serverless event-driven execution. You have completed part 12 of the AZ-900 practice question series. Continue your preparation by opening the complete playlist and watching the remaining parts in sequence. Please like this video, subscribe to Tech with Kaushik, and enable notifications for more cloud certification exam preparation content. Share your score, questions, or feedback in the comments. Thank you for watching. See you in the next part.